What's up guys, it's River, and today we're looking at the best point and shoot and compact cameras. We're gonna look at different cameras, but also different usage, such as everyday shooting, travel photos, and vlogging. And of course, different price points for different users. By the way, if you're new to the channel, we talk about anything and everything to do with camera gear, including helping you guys find the perfect camera. So if you do enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like, helps me keep making more of this content for you guys, and subscribe if you want to see more of this content. And as always, I'm gonna leave links down below in the description for all the cameras that we talk about today. So make sure to check those out, and let's get into the video. All right guys, let's get right into it. So the first camera on the list is the Canon G9X, and this is probably the camera that most of the casual shooters are going to gravitate towards. Mainly because Canon cameras have gorgeous colors straight out of the box. You almost don't need to edit your photos. On top of that, they are extremely user-friendly. It's super easy to just pick up these cameras and get great results. And as for technical specifications, if you're a nerd like me, this camera has a 20 megapixel sensor, which is pretty standard for a camera like this. But what makes this camera and point and shoots really interesting is the fact that it has a lens built right in with an incredible zoom range. The lens on the G9X is about a 28 to 84 millimeters, which isn't super wide, but it's not super tight either. If you're a casual shooter, you will do just fine. But if you're someone that really wants to get impressive wide shots and really majestic cinematic images, whether you're traveling or vlogging, this is not the camera for you. If you're a casual shooter, this camera will be perfect for you. You literally get everything you need with this one lens. However, I should mention that this camera and this lens is not great for low light situations, especially when you're shooting on the tighter end of this lens. Basically, if you want something for low light, I have another camera for you later in this list. But this camera does have flash if you want to take photographs in low light, but that flash really won't do much in video. And when it comes to shooting photos, this camera does 8 frames per second, which is pretty decent for this price point. At 8 frames per second, that is more than enough for everyday casual shooting, even something with a little bit of movement and action. And on top of that, this camera does full HD up to 60 frames per second, so you do get 2 times slow motion. And overall, the image in both photo and video mode is crisp and sharp. I really recommend this camera to somebody that wants an everyday casual camera and really just wants an upgrade from their cell phone. And if you're a casual shooter, the design of this camera is going to be a dream for you. It's super easy to just pick up and get great results. Everything is user-friendly and streamlined. And surprisingly, the G9X has pretty decent internal audio. But 2 things that I should mention is that the battery life is pretty small. You will definitely have to get a spare, and it does not have an input for external microphone. Again, it's a casual camera. For something with an external microphone input, I have a camera later for you in this list. So the next camera on the list is a Sony RX100 Mark 6. If you want the horsepower and specs of a proper camera, but you want it all in the form factor of a small compact or point and shoot camera, the RX100 is perfect. This camera is for anybody that's a serious enthusiast or trying to do semi-professional or semi-serious work. So what makes this camera really interesting are the specs, so let's talk about it. In terms of the actual sensor, it still has a 20 megapixel sensor, which again is very standard for these cameras. But when it comes to photo speed, it actually shoots at 24 frames per second. That is as fast as video. You literally cannot miss a shot with this camera, even if you tried. But one of the most interesting things about this camera is the fact that it has a 24 to 200 millimeter zoom range. That is insane. You could literally shoot a wide shot and shoot something almost a mile down. It is a ridiculous lens. But it still has a variable aperture between 2.8 and 4.5. However, unlike the last camera that was bad in low light because of the variable aperture, this camera is actually pretty decent. At 200 millimeter zoom range, 4.5 is actually the perfect aperture. Otherwise, you would have too shallow a depth of field, and it'd be hard to get anything in focus. Speaking of focus, the autofocus in this camera is fantastic. Sony is literally leading the industry when it comes to autofocus, and this camera is no different. And on top of that, this camera also does 4K video up to 30 frames per second. And in full HD mode, it does up to 120 frames per second for 5 times slow motion. But if you're a slow motion fan, this camera actually has a dedicated slow motion mode that allows you to shoot 240, 480, and 960 frames per second for like ultra buttery smooth slow motion. But there is a drawback. The higher the frame rate, the lower the quality of the video, and at 960 frames per second, it's basically potato quality. But if you're somebody that just likes to capture things in slow motion for fun, this is a must-have. But that's not all. This camera also has cinema profiles built right in, including cinema and S-Log 2, which is pretty incredible. So if you really wanted to take your video in this camera and color grade it to look like a proper professional camera, you could. And on top of that, you could actually connect it to an external recorder and get 4:2 colors. So if you were a professional that has a proper Sony camera like the A7S line or the A6000 line, you could easily use this as one of your B cams. And the dynamic range of this camera is extremely impressive. It does not feel like a point and shoot or compact camera at all. It honestly looks like a proper big boy camera. And when it comes to design and ergonomics, this camera is well built and super easy to use. However, Sony menus tend to be a bit cumbersome. But one thing that I should note is that this camera has an input jack for external audio if you want to get a bit serious with your video making. But one thing to note, the RX100 does have a pretty small battery life. Again, that's pretty standard with compact cameras. At the end of the day, the Sony RX100 is totally overkill for 99% of the people. But if you're in that 1% that wants the horsepower of a DSLR or mirrorless camera in the form factor of a compact camera, this camera is a must-have. But chances are, if you're watching this video, you're either looking to get your first camera or you really want to take your photo and video quality to the next level. In that case, I highly recommend checking out the Camera Boost course. In this course, I'm going to show you how to take your beginner or mid-level compact camera and make it perform like a $3,000 pro camera. I'm going to show you everything that you need to know to technically master your camera and understand it inside and out. On top of that, I'm going to share all of my creative secrets with you to show you how to take those breathtaking photos and stunning videos all with your compact camera. Because here's the thing that no one tells you. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on expensive camera equipment. What you need to do is acquire skills and knowledge so that you can properly use the camera you already have. So if you want to take your photos and videos to the next level, I highly recommend checking out the Camera Boost course in the link down below. I promise it will absolutely change your work forever. So next up, let's look into the vlogging and travel cameras. The only difference between these cameras is that they have a flip-up screen for you to be able to see yourself, and on top of that, they have stellar internal audio. So when it comes to vlogging, one of the most popular cameras out there and has been for many years is the Canon G7X Mark II and its slightly older brother, the G7X Mark III. So the G7X is a lot like the G9X with a few improvements. For starters, the sensor is exactly the same and they both do 8 frames per second in photo speed. And the G7X has a very impressive lens with a zoom range between 24mm to 100mm, and it has a variable aperture between 1.8 and 2.8. Despite being a variable aperture, this camera would be fantastic in low light. And when it comes to video, it does full HD up to 60 frames per second. Sadly, no 4K or 120 frames per second. But if you do want 4K, the Mark III actually offers 4K up to 30 frames per second and 120 frames per second in full HD. But personally, the reason I would get the Mark III is probably the input for an external audio. The autofocus in both the Mark II and the Mark III is great. It's not quite Sony good, but if you're mainly recording yourself and vlogging with it, it's going to do a very good job keeping you in focus. And when it comes to design and ergonomics, the two cameras are almost identical, but the first thing you'll notice is that they both have a flip-up screen so that you can see yourself while filming. And that flip-up screen is also a touchscreen for autofocus, so while you're filming yourself, you can just easily tap your face and make sure you're in focus. Personally, I love the G7X Mark II. I've had mine for about 5 years. And if you want 4K 120 plus an audio jack in your camera, for $100 more, you can actually upgrade to the Mark III, and that camera delivers just as much as the Mark II. The camera itself is well built, easy to use, the menus are great, but one thing that I do have to mention is that the battery life kind of sucks. Again, it's just the nature of compact cameras. So the G7X Mark II and Mark III are pretty great vlogging cameras, but what if you're somebody that wants to vlog, do a little bit of cinematic stuff, just really take everything that you're doing to the next level? Or maybe you're a content creator. Maybe you do this professionally. In that case, the camera that I would absolutely recommend to you hands down is the Sony ZV-1. This camera was designed with content creators in mind from the ground up. And the crazy thing is, it's not that much more expensive than the G7X line. The Sony ZV-1 has a 20 megapixel sensor with a built-in lens between 24 to 70 millimeters with a variable aperture between f1.8 and 2.8, which makes it great in low light. And much like the RX100, when it comes to photos, it does 24 frames per second. You literally cannot miss your shot. And the video specs are very similar. It does 4K up to 30 frames per second with full HD up to 120 frames per second and a special slow motion mode that allows you to get as slow as 960 frames per second. And the autofocus is absolutely top-notch, fast, and reliable. So what makes the Sony ZV-1 so different and special? The main things that set this camera apart are the special software features that Sony has included specifically for content creators. One of my favorite features is actually digital depth of field. So with a small click of the button, you will get way more depth of field behind your subject or yourself, which simply makes your camera look more cinematic and more of a higher quality. On top of that, because Sony knows that people are buying this camera specifically to shoot themselves, they've even included a soft skin filter, which works pretty well. It's similar to the TikTok or Instagram filter. It takes out any wrinkles or fine lines and just kind of makes you look a little bit better. And on top of that, the internal audio in this camera is pretty stellar. Sony's really gone above and beyond to add 2 internal microphones because they want people using this with the internal audio, and I have to say it sounds pretty decent. But it still has an input for external audio if you want it. But the most obvious thing that Sony added to this is a side articulating screen. Not only is it much more user-friendly when filming, but it also allows you to see yourself, and if you're filming something that's not you, you're simply able to get a low angle, high angle shot with much more ease. And one thing that Sony added in is a zoom ring on the lens that simply lets you go between different focal lengths, which personally I like, but most of you guys probably won't notice it. On top of that, this camera also has the new Sony color science, which looks absolutely amazing. So if you already have a Sony camera but didn't like the old Sony colors, this camera is going to solve those problems. And in case you're wondering, it does have cinema profile, so you can really color grade your footage and make something very cinematic for YouTube. And when it comes to design and ergonomics, this camera is super easy to use. You can easily pick it up and get great results. But what really takes this camera above and beyond is the Bluetooth grip that you can also buy for it. For an extra $100, you get a Bluetooth grip that not only works as a grip that allows you to stop and start recording, change your zoom length, but on top of that, can also work as a tripod. And for a creator on the go that's constantly shooting with their camera, this grip is going to make it that much easier to use your camera. Overall, if you're a content creator or a serious vlogger, the Sony ZV-1 is the best camera for you if you're looking to get a compact camera. But if you're someone that's not a content creator, there's a lot of extra dials and whistles on this camera that you will not need. In that case, I actually do recommend you guys get the G7X line simply because it's much more user-friendly and straight to the point without all the extra stuff. Well guys, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more, and let me know in the comments down below what camera you guys are thinking of picking up. And as always, if you want to take your work to the absolute next level, make sure to check out the Camera Boost course in the link down below, and I will either see you in the course or in the next video. Peace.